Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Francesca Gerner. I work with Catholic Care, which is the auspice agency of this network, of which you're members, and I welcome you to the forum. Before I go too far, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands that where we meet to hold this forum, and also pay my respects to elders past and present. I have a couple of housekeeping matters. One is for right at the end. The whole floor today is chock-a-block with judges, and they're working very hard. So when you leave, please be mindful and quiet as you do leave this floor. The next one is that should an alarm sound, stay where you are, sit very still, and wardens will come and direct you to safety or with wherever else we need to go if such occasion arises. The other one is the toilets. You don't have to go back out through the alarmed doors, just head that way and turn right. But there are interns and students who work with the Family Law Pathways Network, and they'll be helpful with any questions that you have. I hope you've all picked up something to drink and some refreshments, because this is a rather packed program and probably a fairly intense subject matter that we've picked for our forum today. I'm going to introduce each speaker separately, and our first speaker today is Rodney Vlais. Is that how I pronounce it? Thank you. Rodney is a psychologist and manager of No to Violence and the Men's Referral Service. Over the past 10 years, he has woven together experience in providing training, systems advocacy, men's behaviour change program facilitation, practice development and policy writing in responding to and preventing men's violence against women. Rodney was previously involved in a number of other social justice struggles at the global, national and local levels, both in Australia and overseas. He is passionate about working alongside women to transform patriarchal institutions and structures, and in helping men identify and loosen gender-based and other forms of privilege. And it's a privilege for us to have Rodney with us today. Welcome, Rodney.
Thank you, Francesca, and to the Family Law Pathways Network. That's really given my politics away, hasn't it? I forgot to brief you. I'm actually a psychologist in recovery here, but I'm still actually technically a psychologist. I too would like to start by acknowledging the land that we're sitting and standing on, of the Wurundjeri people, of the Kulin Nation, and of all other Wadawurrung language groups in this area, and to recognise that we have evidence of Wurundjeri sovereignty over this land going back at least 30,000 years or more. In the area that I was born, in Perth, which is Noongar land, part of an Aboriginal nation recently termed the Wajak area, there's archaeological evidence of sovereignty that goes back at least 40,000 years in the Bayswater Plains. So we're clearly on Aboriginal land, always has been, always will be Aboriginal land. And for those of us like myself who aren't Aboriginal and are part of a coloniser history, I recognise that there's a lot of work for me to do about what it means to be living on Aboriginal land, to co-manage this land, and to listen to Aboriginal people around their struggles for sovereignty and dignity. The organisation I work for, No to Violence and the Men's Referral Service, is really passionate about how we can change the conversation and narrative in family violence away from the common questions we often hear. Why doesn't she leave? What does she need to do to protect herself and her children? How could she stand to still keep living with that man? And towards, how do we focus on him, the person who's causing the risk? What's our responsibilities as a community, as a service system, to look at the source of the harm that's being done and to keep him within view. It's a focus, a flip in focus, which I think we're slowly grappling and coming to terms with, at least to some extent. It's obviously been a huge last 2 or 3 years. There's been so much work done by all of us over decades, starting from women's advocates and activists back in the early 70s and setting up the first safe houses and refuges under incredible difficulty and with a lot of opposition and with a lot of risk. That's laid the groundwork for these last 2 or 3 years that has provided a platform that's helped to shoulder up amazing victim survivors like Rosie Batty and others to put this more in the spotlight. We are having governments, greater or lesser extent across Australia, becoming more braver around giving family and domestic violence the issue that it deserves. And to look at what does this mean for perpetrator accountability? What does this mean for placing a focus on the men who are causing harm? Because the research clearly shows that if you look at all forms of interpersonal violence, all forms, 95% of those who commit that are men, whether that be against women or against men. And we're also seeing an increasing focus on children. Now, for yourselves as part of this network, of course, children have been your paramount concern for forever. But for the family violence sector, that is something which is growing for us. And from the first safe houses set up by women's activists in the early 70s, children were very, very, very important to the movement. It wasn't just women who were seen as our clients. But trying to understand what family violence means for the rights for children, for their development, stability, safety, and trying to understand what does increasing the focus on perpetrators mean for the harm that children experience, and for what we want those men to do differently so that their children have safer lives. And it's that which I want to focus on for the next 5 or 10 minutes, just to fill out a few of those considerations about what an increased focus on men who cause the harm mean when we're working together around the safety and stability and development of children. We know, unfortunately, that a number of men who use family and domestic violence engage in deliberate tactics to harm children. That it's a wake-up call when we look at the small to moderate amount of research out there that shows higher rates of direct child maltreatment, higher rates of child harm, higher rates of sexual abuse of children, higher rates of neglect in families where a man is using violence. It's really interesting, that issue of child neglect, because when we think of child neglect, we automatically go, well, what is she not doing that she should be doing as a parent? We often don't think about, well, how's he neglecting the children? Which of course is part of our double standards in our society, where all that men need to do is wear our baby on an infant carrier and suddenly we're a good dad. Whereas mums, of course, are criticised extensively for any single thing they do wrong as a parent. So we often don't think about that. But to go back to the point, unfortunately, men who perpetrate family and domestic violence targeted against their partner, there's a high proportion of those men who are also directly harming children, not only harming children through their intimate partner violence, but actually directly using physical assault, sexual abuse tactics. So that's part of the wake-up call for us, is for those of us in the family and domestic violence sector, is how do we assess that more carefully. We also know that some men who perpetrate family and domestic violence deliberately use tactics to undermine the non-offending parent's parenting, and heterosexual relationships to undermine the mother's parenting. And there can be a range of things that men deliberately do there. It can be sleep deprivation. It can be keeping her up to 1, 2 o'clock in the morning because he knows that she'll be very tired in parenting the next morning. It can include interfering with her alcohol recovery plan if she is indeed struggling with a substance abuse issue, which might have predated the relationship or might be partly or largely caused by his use of violence. We know that some men will deliberately talk down about her in front of the children, criticise her decisions, her spending habits, criticise her for doing things wrong according to his way of seeing things, criticise her in demeaning and humiliating ways in order to try to align at least some of the children onto his side. We know that some men will unfortunately use a mum's vulnerability in pregnancy in order to escalate violence. And we know that some men will use a range of social violence and economic violence tactics to isolate her. And she's isolated. That means her children often are as well too, because as we know, for children to have the sort of life that we want children to lead, there's connections that are really important there. School connections, community connections, health connections. And that isolation that these men cause for her means that the children can be cut off. You know, we know that men, and for some other men who use violence, it may not be in this intention to sabotage her parenting or to isolate the family and the children from the supports and health services and school-based services that they need. It might not be that intentional, but the effects are there. You know, it's the perpetrator who believes that he's the victim. It's the man, we see this over and over again in mental behaviour change programs, who have such a strong, what we call victim stance, who have fairly unreasonable expectations of her that she should do this or she shouldn't do that. And if she doesn't follow those expectations, that he feels the right to punish her. And those expectations can be in a range of different ways. Just to give one little example, he may hold her responsible for making him feel angry. So if she does something, says something that upsets him, makes him feel uncomfortable, touches a raw nerve with him, that male sense of entitlement, which burdens women with everything to do with the emotional lives of our families, his thinking, using that sense of entitlement that as men we gain from our culture, will go, why did you raise that? Why did you discuss that? You're going on about this over and over again. Don't you know that gets me angry? And yet you're doing that again. You're doing that to get at me. You're deliberately doing that to provoke me. It's a way of thinking, having expectations, entitlement-based expectations of her, where when she doesn't meet those unreasonable assumptions, because she never can do that perfectly, it's impossible, given the nature of those expectations he has. He believes he has the right to punish her because he believes that he's the one who's the victim here. So he might see her as disloyal because she believes something different from him. And so often with the men who are using violence, they have a sense of being the victim. They can persuade themselves that they're actually the victim in this situation. And some men can very eloquently talk with others. They can persuade others to help them to believe that he's the victim. And so as part of that, as part of trying to manage, control the truth in the family, he will engage in a range of efforts to isolate her from anyone who might have a dissenting view. He might be concerned about a friend of hers who he thinks she might be talking to about his behaviour, and that might lead her to get some courage to leave the relationship. So he might threaten her in a way so that he doesn't see that friend again, or might not leave her with any money to be able to go out, or might humiliate her on social media. It's about control. It's about controlling her life and her children's life. And part of it is controlling the story about his behaviour. And there's some South Australian research that shows that when he engages in a range of different tactics, subtle and fear-producing, that leads her to doubt herself, is trying to get her to think that he's the victim, that she's being unreasonable to him, that she's not a good parent, that if only she did this differently then he wouldn't get angry, that the children's thinking are affected as well too, that they get incredibly torn between their lived experience of this isn't safe for me and I don't like what Daddy's doing, and his propaganda, which is trying to control the family's truth, to make it out that actually she's a neglectful mum, that she's a bad mum. Look, she's taking all these codeine tablets all the time, see how pathetic she is. You know, these are the words that men use. And it's awful for the children who are really caught. And then when this goes on for years, it then becomes really, really difficult for mums to be able to sometimes come to their own truth and their own safe, solid understanding of, do I want to stay with him or not? What are my expectations of him if we are to stay together? What is safe contact, given that I've decided to separate, for those mums who do? What is safe contact for my children with him? My children do love him, and he can be, I won't say a good father, but he can do some important things, and I don't want to be left alone with my parenting, and he can help a bit. Often women are left alone with those very, very, very difficult decisions in a situation where their thinking is really affected by his propaganda over years and years and years. So as you all know, it means that when we're doing work with families, when we're doing holistic work with families, including, of course, in situations where separation has occurred, it's very, very, very messy. There's his propaganda putting out this truth. There might be the mum who's not in necessarily the best state because she's experienced his violence over so many years and has been influenced by his propaganda. She might have been doing some things to resist his violence. She might even have fought back, in inverted commas. She might even have made the decision that even though I know that throwing this vase next to him against the wall is going to result in him assaulting me, the dignity is so important for me now to resist it, I'm going to do that. And she does it, and then she's charged by police, and then he puts an intervention order out onto her. These things happen, we know, they're very messy situations. And with the children, when we're trying to weigh up so many things, when so many children are living through the violence, where we can't so easily take the perspective of, well, let's do the trauma repair work with the children after they're out of a traumatic situation, because unfortunately the trauma is continuing because he's still behaving to the mum in those ways. Where we're trying to work out what is the best interests for a child, what is a safe level of contact from him, and what do we need him to do differently in order to get to a point where we can know what that safe contact is. You know, it can sometimes be very, very difficult when we are exposed to such intense stories of men's use of violence to still try to hold a high bar of what we want to expect from dads. We want fathers, all of us as fathers, not just those who are perpetrating family and domestic violence, to be very involved in the lives of our children. We want fathers to know our children's social networks, to notice when our child's not being invited to birthday parties and to go, I wonder if that means that our child is being socially excluded a bit from school. We want men to be able to support the mum's child maternal health nurse visits and indeed maybe go to some of them rather than sabotage them. We want him, particularly those who've used violence, to get to a point, it may take a while to get there, but to get to a point where he realises that I have modelled violence so much to my 10-year-old son as a hypothetical age, over all of his life, that I can't turn that around. I need to bring other non-violent male role models into our family's life in order for him to be able to learn non-violent ways of managing conflict, because I can't do that myself now. I just don't have that integrity because he's just learned violence from me. Now, these are very high expectations. We get very few men who use violence to get to that point, even when they go through men's behaviour change programs. But one of the things that, an aspiration that we want to do better, and by we I mean family violence service systems, child protection systems, family services systems, family law systems. So by we I mean a big we. Is for each family, for each child who's affected by a man's use of violence, to get a better understanding in each situation of, well, what exactly is he doing that is controlling the family? What are his patterns of coercive control? What is his thinking? How does he think about his children? What are the positive and honourable aspects about that we can actually trust? Where he's not just saying, I love my children, I'll do anything for them, but where he can actually express it, articulate it, feel it in a way where you get that sense of there's a bit of child-centeredness there. And what are the ways in which you've been very authoritarian as a parent, where he's putting his child's needs second to last, where he's deliberately sabotaging everything that the child needs. For each child and each man who's using the violence, trying to get that understanding of what specifically is he doing. It's placing the family at risk. What's his way of thinking? What's his social abuse, his financial abuse tactics, his physical abuse tactics? And furthermore, what is he not doing that would be good for him? So it's a sort of question that we might ask a mum. And it may take a number of questions to get to this point and some trust for her to answer this. What ways, might you feel supported by Fred? What are some things that he does that makes this very difficult job of parenting a little bit easier for you? And then after a while, we might then create a space of, are there things that you wish Frederick would do that he's not doing that would make it easier for you? So we also want to have a focus on those things that to build in responsible fatherhood as well. And then how do we base our interventions on that? I feel quite, what's the right word here? I don't want to say I feel sorry. I think many family law practitioners, from my understanding of the work that you do, and Federal Circuit Court judges have an incredibly difficult, very, very difficult task of making decisions, sometimes without that sort of support, to identify those 16 ways in which he's sabotaging the family safety and connections and the things he needs to do. I think in some child protection circumstances, I think we've got the potential over time for family violence specialists and child protection workers to work closely together to identify what are the goals, what's the work that he needs to do over those next 4 to 6 months to become a safe parent, to build his safe parenting capacity, to be able to identify the ways that he's causing harm in the family, to look at risk along the way, to predict how he might respond to, say, a particular Federal Circuit Court hearing, to get to a point with this man of knowing that his sense of entitlement over his children has sustained these last 4 months. So if that Federal Circuit Court hearing goes against him and he doesn't get 100% access to his children like he expects, risk is going to go up. And this is about all of us that are working with children, being able to share information, work together and to support each other on that. I think there is great scope, and I'll conclude on this point. I think there is great scope for more alliances and more opportunities for services that work specifically with men who perpetrate family and domestic violence to assist yourselves in some of this work with families and to, yes, assist the Federal Circuit Court judges in some of the incredibly difficult decisions they make. In the UK, for example, there's an NGO called CAFCAS, I won't go through the acronym, that accepts referrals through the family law system there because judges need some time and need some collaborative input in order to get a sense of those patterns of his thinking, to get a sense of the risk, to get a sense of how his behaviours are affecting the family, and to see if he's willing to engage on them and start to work towards becoming a safer parent by stopping particular things that are harming the family and by taking more responsibility for other things. And in the UK, that's about a source of about 20% of referrals to domestic violence perpetrator programs. And I know that we haven't got those pathways yet established, that we're really at the beginning of some of these conversations. And that issues of information sharing between family violence and family law systems and child protection is a lot of work we need to do. But we're starting to have those conversations. And I think through that there is a way of keeping the person who's causing harm in view of that, and to work together, yes, to have very high aspirations of these men, but to get the feedback we need when they're not reaching these aspirations and when they're actually posing a continued risk towards their children. So for our organisation, No Violence, and I think I can say on behalf of all practitioners who are doing this very tricky, difficult work through mental behaviour change programs and through other ways to work with men who perpetrate family and domestic violence, I think we're looking forward to some of these conversations. We're looking forward defining ways of systems development so we can share information and work more closely together, because not only is reducing risk really important for us, I think we're aware that as family law practitioners, we're dealing with risk in incredibly difficult situations almost every working day. I'll leave it at that.
We are going to hold questions, if that's all right. So for this moment, I'd like to thank Rodney and just do a backward step for a moment, because what Rodney was asked to do, and I think you've done it admirably, is frame the issue of the need to engage perpetrator and talk about the notion of perpetrator-focused practice. And we did start a conversation in this room on just that topic. So I'd now like to introduce Thea Brown from Monash University. Professor Thea Brown was appointed as Professor of Social Work at Monash University in 1988. You're having longevity now, aren't you?
I don't know where you got that from.
Not true.
Well, it is, but I prefer to forget it.
Thank you, my researchers. And she's been head of department, the director of international programs and deputy head, and now professor of research. Prior to this, she worked as a social work manager in health services in New South Wales, in health and local government in Victoria, and as an academic in social work at Melbourne University. I won't go on with some of the other incredible aspects that Thea's been involved with, but I do want to talk about some particular work that she's done. Thea has recently undertaken a longitudinal study of men's behaviour programs and their impact on participants and their partners. This will deepen the conversation we're having that Rodney started for us. The study has followed a large number of men, partners and former partners from 3 states, 7 agencies and 12 program sites over the period from joining a program to completion or dropout, and for a further 2 years. And when we asked Thea, we wanted her to comment on this incredible research and learn a little bit more about the very programs Rodney says that we know we need to engage with and better understand. Thank you, Thea.
Thank you very much for the detail of that introduction. I've been asked today to talk about a study that I've been doing in collaboration with my fellow team members at Monash University and another organisation called Violence Free Families. It's been a very long study on the impact on men and their partners of men's behaviour change programs, and we're now coming to an end. We haven't quite finished, but we're very close to finishing, and we've still got to do a bit more data analysis and a bit more writing, and I'm hoping to see the end of it very soon. It's a very large study, and I can't actually cover the whole study and all the findings today, so if you'll forgive me, I'm going to give you a selection of the findings. But the 2 questions that I want to think about today are how well do men's behaviour change programs work, and how well do we use those programs? I think Rodney has raised the issue of how well do we use them, and I think that considering the growing investment in them by governments, we do need to look very hard at how well we do use them. Now, I've just got to master this. Yep, I've got it. It's working. Now, I presume that most people here know what a men's behaviour change program is, that they arose originally in the United States in the second wave of feminism in the 70s, and they arose out of NGOs that were looking to provide direct services to women whose partners had been violent. And eventually those same services decided that they should address the perpetrators directly. And so they developed men's behaviour change programs, the most famous of which is the Duluth model. And the Duluth model came to really be the predominant model in the United States and really internationally. The movement is now international. There are programs such as the ones in this state of Victoria and in the other states of Australia, throughout the world in most countries. And there are coordinating organisations for these programs in various countries around the world. Now, the study that we did was that we followed men who'd been to a men's behaviour change program for 2 years after they completed the program. And we had, as it was said in the introduction, 7 agencies from 3 states, 12 program sites, and the agencies were Monash, Link, Peninsula Health, LifeWorks, CAPS, Ballarat, Relationships Australia, New South Wales, Catholic Care Sydney, and Anglicare WA. And what we did was we surveyed men at the start of their program, at the end of their program, 1 year later and 2 years later. We intended to survey partners at the end of the program and then follow them up further, but we found that that didn't work. We got very little interest from partners of men who were in the program at that point. So what we did was we gathered partners from agencies who had provided the program, but we took partners whose husbands were not in our study. And then, to our surprise, right at the end of our study period, we found that partners joined into the study in a surprising way. And the partners that were gathered by the agencies tended to be former partners, and the partners that joined into the study were current partners, that is, original, what I call original partners or new partners. I might be talking rather quickly to try and cover the ground. The theory that we used in the study was very much the theory that's been articulated in our watch and the Anne Rose and Vic Health report very recently, which is that violence does emerge in our society because of its patriarchal structure, and that there are other accelerating factors or trigger factors, but the major problem lies in the structure of society. Now, the research design that we used was what's called a longitudinal panel design, which has been used by other people evaluating men's behaviour change programs, such as Dobash and Dobash, Gondov and Kelly and Westmoreland. Now, the research team was not as big as, say, Gondov, who uses a team that's close to 100 people, but there were 2 principals who were social work researchers, 2 assistant researchers, social policy and psychology, Rodney, and 3 interviewers, criminology, corrections and social work. And the funding that we used came from the Federal Department of Social Services and from various philanthropic funds. And I have to say, doing such a study is a very expensive business. And we had an advisory committee of agencies that worked with us during the study, and I really have to offer them my great thanks. I'll just get a glass of water. I've been in meetings all today and I'm running out of speech. There has been a lot of research done on men's behaviour change programs, and it's been undertaken primarily in the United States of America, United States of Australia, and to a lesser extent in the United Kingdom, but there is research going on throughout the world. The original results were very optimistic, and men's behaviour change programs were seen as the answer to men's violence towards their intimate partners. However, subsequently the research looked to be far less optimistic. And there is a controversy that still persists about what does all of this research mean when taken together. And my view of what it means when taken together is that we've now progressed to a stage of having meta-studies done of various studies being grouped together, and they give us approximated ranges of success and failure, and they suggest that success rates from such programs will range from 40 to 90% depending on the research design that is used. And there's a lot of argument about what is the best research design. And my contention is that a lot of the arguments about research design have been unhelpful because they've obstructed people from going on to do further research. They've got so weighted by the controversy, they haven't been prepared to do what I think a good researcher does, which is stick their foot in the puddle and see exactly what's going on. Now, Australian research has lagged behind the rest of the world, particularly lagged behind the USA and UK. And we've been criticised for that by Urbis, who did an audit of programs and research a couple of years ago. And they said the research state, there was very little research being done, that it was only in agency research, it was too small scale, and it wasn't reliable. It's certainly true that very little had been done, but I would not dismiss the research that had been done in the past as being as flawed as they seem to think it was, because my view is that every research gives you some further information, and you are never going to get to a situation where one research study gives you the answer. You need an accumulation of research studies to build up the picture over time, and as you're building up the picture's going to change anyway. So research really needs to be an ongoing process. Now, to get to the study, who are the men? Well, the men represented a wide range in terms of ages, types of employment and education. They range from 18 to 70 plus. Most programs wouldn't take anybody under the age of 18, so the starting age is really a factor of the programs. The end age is more who went. But the modal age was in the mid-40s. More men had been born overseas than is the case in the Australian population. 40% of the men in our study had been born overseas, whereas in the Australian population it's 29%. Within that Australian-born group were 4% Indigenous men. More men weren't working than is the case in the Australian population. 30% were not working, compared with 20% not working normally. And more of them had lost their partners. About 47% had lost their partners prior to starting the program. Now, this next point really relates to what Rodney was saying, which is concern about children. 78% of these men had children, and I think this is something that we should really pay a lot more attention to than we have in the past. And of great concern was the fact that 7% were lone parents. 35% were attending on-court orders. That means they had been sent there through a court and through a corrections order. 17.5% came on a court recommendation. A court recommendation is likely to come from the Family Court, the Federal Circuit Court, or from the Children's Court. The ones on court orders will be coming through the Magistrates Court, the Specialist Domestic Violence Court. 12% came, they said, at their partner's direction, and 36% came of their own accord. Now, it's been pointed out that saying people were ordered to come to the program or not ordered to come to the program is it's a difficult issue to judge, because many of the men who say they came of their own accord were actually impelled by other people. But the thing that I really want you to have a look at is the 35% who came on court orders. Now, I'm going to try and convey with difficulty, a picture of the results. I haven't found a way of putting onto a PowerPoint the picture that I'm going to give you in words, but fundamentally the picture was that men improved considerably between starting the program and finishing the program, but they did not reach a point of all of them inflicting no violence. They fell short of that. We lost quite a number of men between starting the program and finishing the program. Some studies would say that we should call these men program failures. We did a follow-up study of the program failures, not deliberately. We were just trying to follow up these men to see what had happened to them. And we found that a surprising number of them weren't what you could call program failures. They were program dropouts, and they were going on to other programs. Some men became sick and they stopped and they went on to another program. Some men didn't like the program that they had started and they went on to another program. Some men were asked to leave the program because they were too abusive in the program, and these men, our interviewers would say, were still pretty abusive, and at the same time were very distressed, feeling that there was no help for them anywhere. But as Rodney has pointed out, many men who are violent do see themselves as the victim of other people and other events. So we had 110 men finish the program and give us their views about where they were. And at the end of the program, less than 10% of the men reported inflicting violence in 10 of the 15 items. We've got a lot of indicators of their behaviour, and one of the indicators we've got is a version of a conflict tactics scale, which asks men, have they done this and in the last 3 months, and how often have they done it in the last 3 months? So if you can imagine a group of men looking down a page at a lot of different items of behaviour, most of them moved sort of like that, but they didn't get to the no violence point. However, to our surprise, a year later, they had moved further, so that all of the men reported no violence on 6 items, less than 10% reported violence for 6 other items, more than 10% reported violence for 3 items. So we've moved further towards no violence. 2 years later, we have a further movement. So we've got all men reporting no violence for 8 items, fewer than 10% reporting violence for 4 items, but more than 10% reporting violence for 3 items. And if you look at the pattern of the violence they were reporting, they did best in the physical violence area. That was where they reported that they had achieved, you might say, perfection, although you wouldn't actually call it that. The area where they moved least is a contentious area, because they moved in terms of numbers a long way, but they did not get to the naught incidents, and that was in the area of criticism of their partner. And this is a very difficult one, because all partners criticise all partners, but how much criticism do you think is acceptable, and how much do you think is not acceptable? Fundamentally, what they did was they moved. They moved after the program finished, and they continued to move for a further year after that. But our money did not permit us to follow them any further than that, so we don't know if they move any further than that, or whether they actually stabilise there, or alternatively whether they slide back. The Further indicators that I haven't reported on were the frequency of the violence, their own ratings of improvement, their own understanding of impact of violence on their partner, on children and other people, and their former and current partner's views. Now, we reviewed a number of factors to see if any were associated with program success, and we found that age, employment, education and having a partner seemed to be associated, but the only one factor with statistical significance was having been court-ordered to a program. That was the one thing that had a statistical impact. And why? We don't know. We're not the only people to find this. Some American studies have found this too, but we're only at the edge of this. Why would this be so? It might be that the men are having tighter monitoring. It might be that the corrections officer's giving them a support person. It might be that the shock of legal proceedings has been a motivating factor. And it might be that the fear of legal penalties has been a motivating factor. Because for some men, if they did have a conviction recorded, that was going to impact on their lives quite substantially. And we also found when we looked at those men who were court-ordered that they had a lower rate of mental health problems. Why? I do not know. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, that finding, but that was what we found. And it may be that somebody doing another study starting tomorrow or starting a year ago is going to find something different. And what we would ask is that further research be done to see if our findings are confirmed or if they're not. Now, the last point that I wanted to tackle is what Rodney began to tackle, which is the use of programs. I was very intrigued by a report in the Australian on the 18th of the 3rd about a federal circuit court judge who had to decide about the care of children. The father had been admitted to a private psychiatric hospital several times for suicidal ideation and attempts, and had been detained as an involuntary patient. His former partner said that he had made threats to her of killing her, and she was worried that he might kill the children. I don't wish to comment on the decision that they made about the supervision of the children. What I do want to comment on is the fact that the judge recommended the man go to a men's behaviour change program. Now, that judge didn't have the benefit of our research when he made that decision, because I think if he did, he might have made a somewhat different decision. And what we would say as a result of our study is that when a court is involved in the decision-making process of going to a program or not, our study would say it's better to make an order, not a recommendation. And our study would also suggest it's better to make an order that includes post-program regular professional support, because all the men who felt that they were successful all organised continuing professional support for themselves. And in our study, this ran over 2 years. One man, for example, went to a behaviour change program continuously. He just started on the new program when the old one finished, and the agency was prepared to let him do this. But the men that we met see their success as very precarious. They don't believe that they can maintain it on their own. They believe that they need a lot of help. Our study would also suggest that if a man has a mental health problem, and 30% in our study did have mental health problems, that a court should make as part of that order a recommendation, because it's probably all they could do, that the person have mental health assistance while they're having the program. Because the study would suggest that men with mental health problems who don't get that help while they're having the problem, while they're doing the program, will not do as well as men who are having help during the program. And we also suggest that the judge should have requested an assessment report after completion of the program and then made a decision about the care of the children. And we also think that the judge should note, and he probably does know this already, that men's behaviour change programs do not usually involve much focus on parenting. And this is one of the problems for them. And considering that they are mostly 12, 14, 15-week programs, it's very hard for them to put everything into the program. But this is an issue to be debated in the future, considering so many of those men have had children and some of them were the sole parent of those children. What can we do about parenting support for them? So, thank you very much for listening to me, and I need to start by saying how lovely it was to be at the Victorian Family Pathways group, because 16, 17 years ago I was part of a national committee, the Family Law Pathways Advisory Group, and this organisation recommended that such organisations as this be established, and it took the federal government quite a long time to move to that point, but your pathway group seems to be doing extremely well to me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Thea. What crossed my mind when I heard Thea talk about the findings, the particular clients that did well were those that had been ordered, it flashed into my head, I wonder if that had something to do with the patriarchal nature of our whole society, and if the boss speaks, a la the order, then you just go along with it. But anyway, that's for better minds than mine to ponder on, and we can ask some questions later. And now I'd like to introduce our final panelist speaker today, and that's Elena Campbell. We asked Elena to particularly comment on a 2015 report, Opportunities for Early Intervention, in the light of the recommendations of the Royal Commission. Before I invite Elena to come up, let me tell you that she has worked in social and legal policy for many years. I won't give the dates because, you know, I might have let something out of the bag with Thea. Elena was a legal advisor to the Victorian Attorney General, providing advice and overseeing the implementation of reform areas ranging from therapeutic justice, equal opportunity, human rights, sexual assault and family violence reform. Elena has worked as a consultant writer and editor for a number of senior figures in the government and organisations, including the Australian Human Rights Commission. In particular, Elena researched and developed the principles which guided the Commission's ultimate recommendation for its review into the treatment of women in the Australian Defence Forces. Presently, Elena is the Manager of Policy and Research for the Centre for Innovative Justice. She has authored the CIJ's report, Opportunities for Early Intervention, bringing perpetrators of family violence into view. Right on theme, Elena. Elena has recently completed work concerning ways in which to measure justice mechanisms more effectively, and has led the CIJ's collaboration with the Magistrates Court to improve the clarity and enforceability of family violence intervention orders. I want Elena on my team. Thanks, Elena.
Thank you, Francesca, and obviously I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and of course to thank the organisers of this event for inviting me to contribute today. I know a lot of work goes on behind the scenes. As Francesca has said, I work at the Centre for Innovative Justice, which is a bit of a mouthful, so we just say CIJ. And the CIJ's mission is to research, teach, advocate, like advocating, like arguing a lot, and translate into practice innovative ways to repair and prevent the harm of legal disputes and crime. So we don't have a specific focus on family law per se, although it's lovely to see that my experience in family law as a paralegal was actually under the wisdom and guidance of two people standing here today, so it's really nice to see them here. That was a very long time ago. But when we were first established, we were given I thought I'd give you a bit of background to how the report came about before I tell you what it says. We were given a seeding grant by the Commonwealth to conduct 4 discrete research projects with fairly broad parameters. And the third one asked us to focus on early interventions in a justice-related area. So while we were contemplating what our focus would actually be, I, like many people, were completely floored and moved by the Four Corners episode on Rosie Batty. What struck me about the story, in addition to the tragedy of Luke's death and Rosie's courage, was the way in which Luke's father, Greg Anderson, was constantly bounced off the legal system instead of being kept within view. And how that system, to the extent that we can ever call it that, seemed designed to wait until a perpetrator's behaviour had effectively gone beyond recall before it was prepared to step in. So spiralling further into distorted thinking, there were many times that different parts of what we understand to be the justice system could have drawn Anderson in, could have intervened, and though we will obviously never know, potentially reduced the risk that he posed. And the coroner has, of course, described in detail the failings of the different parts of the system in this regard, particularly in relation to information sharing. But what struck me, however, was the failing of a reactive justice system to engage with its own responsibility to hold this man to account. From the respondent churned through the court system who doesn't understand the basis of a protection order, which is the basis for our rep that Francesca referred to earlier, to the man sitting in a behaviour change waiting list with his motivation waning, and that's the point that we need to make about MBCPs, that, regardless of the evidence about 40 to 90% success at the moment, although hopefully this will change, the number of people actually getting in is very, very small. From the individual jailed for a family violence assault who receives no rehabilitation, or to the man like Anderson who can't be located by police when an arrest needs to be made and who ultimately commits the unthinkable. Too often the detached operation of the conventional court process, which is built, when you think about it, on denial and minimisation, similar themes that come out in a perpetrator's response to his violence, it serves to propel perpetrators away. So what would it look like, we wondered, if this repeated contact was more effective, more meaningful, and most importantly occurred at an earlier point? So that then became the objective of our research. And over the ensuing months, we looked at initiatives and programs that already existed around Australia and internationally, and of course spoke to a wide range of people much wiser and more experienced than us, including Rodney, who was invaluable, not only to bring in their expertise, but also to bring the voices of the sector to the fore. And crucially, we also spoke to Rosie very early in the process about what we were planning to do, and she confirmed that she saw that focus as essential. So the aim of the CIJ's report then, which Rosie ultimately launched, was to position interaction with the justice system not as a tertiary intervention, not one that runs onto the field in the final minutes of the game and can't do anything to change the result, but as an early and ongoing intervention, one which writes those who commit family violence into the analysis from the start. And in turn, in doing so, the aim of the report is to promote the potential of the justice system to interrupt the trajectory of family violence and to make those who use it more visible by monitoring a perpetrator's behaviour, by bringing him back to court to account for his commitments, by making sure he's known to relevant service agencies, by addressing related addiction, mental health or accommodation problems, and by identifying whatever stake he has in becoming a safer man. It also means promoting the justice system as a dynamic rather than a static actor. At the moment, we know it's like the Queen Mary. It's very difficult for courts to respond in an agile way. They need to be able to adapt and tailor their responses as circumstances change, to be effective as early as possible with those most likely to work towards safety, and then be freed up to keep those who pose a higher risk, who are never going to work towards safety, to keep those people firmly on the radar. In doing so, our report does not suggest that there is an easy solution, and certainly no single one. Obviously, we need a range of interventions, ones which a perpetrator encounters repeatedly and which reinforce over and over that his behaviour is something that we simply won't accept. That said, our report doesn't call for a blunt or tougher law and order criminal justice response, because while a lock them up and throw away the key approach may sound like a perpetrator accountability, and certainly imprisonment is necessary, absolutely necessary in some cases, if this is our only response, it abdicates our collective responsibility to address the violence at its source and ensure that there are not more victims down the track. What's more, it abdicates our responsibility to acknowledge that family violence is not something committed by an aberrant fraction who can be pushed conveniently out of sight, but by a wide range of individuals whose behaviour and sense of entitlement we have collectively allowed to endure. So collectively, we argued, we have to develop a smarter response, drawing on what we already know while harnessing the opportunity that contact with the justice system presents to step in more effectively at the earliest stage. And this is one of the things we wanted to highlight, that while potentially and hopefully women and children may exhibit help-seeking behaviour and have contact with a range of agencies, although interestingly we know that the cohort of women whose partners are in behaviour change programs are often less likely to have experienced any interaction with specialist services prior to that. What we do know is that men who use violence often have no contact with any other service, and I seem to remember a finding from an earlier report of yours, Thea, that found that the blokes in that program just haven't had any experience of contact with health services.
That was true in that study.
Yeah.
I think it's a little less true in this study, but there is a degree of isolation, yes.
So what we found in our work and in our discussions is that often that the men that were presenting at court, that courts were dealing with in a range of ways, had not only never been asked or held to account by an authority about their violence, they'd never been asked about anything else either. So a good example of something that struck us as a good example is a small service in Tasmania, the Defendant Health Liaison Service, to which family violence offenders are bailed because it has Tasmania has a predominantly criminal justice response rather than a civil response we have in Victoria, through which men could get their other issues, associated issues, assessed. And the people who run that program say these blokes come to us, they've never ever told anyone about any of the associated issues that they have. So that's when some valuable work starts to occur, and it's leveraged by that interaction with the court that wouldn't otherwise occur. So consequently, that's the focus that we tried to bring to our report. Identifying what else can happen in that when someone comes in contact with the criminal justice system or even the civil justice system, what else can occur to keep the bloke within view, but to try and address what's going on at an earlier stage. So consequently, the report's recommendations include that call-outs to police be used as opportunities not only to apply an appropriate civil or criminal justice response, but also to make referrals to other services, including crisis accommodation. Once at court, the report suggests ways in which this interaction can become more purposeful. As I said before, harnessing potential to connect them to early referral and treatment, recognising the value of appropriately trained respondent workers and duty lawyers, but using the imprimatur of a judge's authority to increase a man's willingness to comply with orders. And that's, I find you'll find in there very, very interesting, in that whether it's a patriarchal response or not, there is, when used well, with good courtcraft, the imprimatur of a judge can go a long way to identifying the state that a man may have in working towards change. And it's not just the threat of imprisonment upon breach. It's not just that. It's now we've got our eyes on you, mate, and we're going to work with you and keep bringing you back and to make sure to see how you're going. We also recommended ways in which correction systems can be used more effectively. So as we know, tales are filled with people who have experienced family violence or are perpetrating family violence or both. And so we suggested not only monitoring those offenders who are known to have used family violence, but to use those settings to screen for and identify family violence perpetration in the general population of offenders. As a way, again, to start looking at what can we do to intervene if he's going to get out eventually, which he will, particularly if he's on a family violence related sentence, because they're usually short. He's going to get out. What can we do now to make sure that things are going to, the risk is going to be reduced with his, subsequent partners, even if he's separated from his previous partner. So we were far from the first to make calls for this kind of course. And Rodney and Thea are just two examples of people who've been working in the field of perpetrator interventions for a long time. But specifically, my hope for our report was that it would offer a useful way for parts of the justice system in particular to talk about perpetration of family violence more constructively and articulate their own responsibilities in a far more proactive way. And now that 8 kilograms of Royal Commissioner goodness is in our collective hands, it is 8 kilos, I've measured it. It's heartening to see the kind of language and ideas that our report offered being used elsewhere. Now, the director of the CIJ, my boss, likes to think it is solely because of our report that certain recommendations have been made by the Commission, but I suggested it's more to do with timing and common sense. After all, it's logical that we go to the source of the problem if you want to address it effectively. So it's been pleasing to see that the Commission has came to similar conclusions in terms of positioning interactions with perpetrators or respondents, men, whatever terminology you want to use, as central, not peripheral, to our collective response. So the proposed support and safety hubs are just one example, where rather than L17 referrals for men and women going to different agencies who don't necessarily speak directly to each other, they'll be housed in a central location. Now that has symbolic value as well as practical value. Equally, the Commission makes a range of recommendations in relation to crisis accommodation for men, which obviously, if he hasn't got some, while removal of violent men from their homes is a really, really important part of our response, we don't back it up with accommodation, then they're never going to be in a position to be able to work effectively towards change, but also we don't know where they are, which is obviously, the problem that we have at Greg Anderson. The Commission calls for a more considered response to adolescents who use family violence, which is one of our big priorities at the moment, and an integrated and planned development of the NPC sector, all of which signal an encouraging shift towards engaging with this responsibility to hold men accountable. But perhaps what I'm especially excited about as a lawyer and researcher in relation to justice interventions is the way in which the Commission has positioned the court's obligation to respond to and intervene with men who use violence in a far more proactive way. So from the expansion of specialist court divisions to exploration of the potential for swift and certain sanctions, to a more victim-centred response, the Commission has pushed courts to the fore and told them to live their game. Now, in a strange way, I think it's given courts the permission that they might have been waiting for to write themselves into the analysis more prominently. It remains to be seen how this will unfold, of course, because courts, like all sectors, are reeling and grappling with what it all means and how they're going to get everything done in it, which things that they should tackle first. But regardless of how the detail unfolds, I do think that there's been a shift away from our understandable fear that talking for too long about men who use violence or investing too many resources in them will simply detract from services for women. Now, obviously, women and children's safety has to be the priority, the objective of all interventions with violent men. But this aim will not be met unless we start to grapple more intelligently and effectively with those who pose the risk, unless we ask every time, who's got eyes on this bloke? So as common sense as it may seem, it still requires a cultural shift in the way that we operate as a system and within many areas of service provision. And for example, I still talk to, at a local level, many specialist service providers, and when I describe a situation, a hypothetical situation, or they tell me about a case and I say, okay, so what's happening in that particular situation for the man, I'll often still just get a blank stare. That's still not factored in. Oh, that's not our responsibility. It's all of our responsibility. And though we're a long way from where we need to be, with the backing of the Commission's recommendations, I do think we've at least started to find the right path. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Elena. All right, well, we have some time now for questions. There are 2 microphones, and even though you might have a loud voice, please wait for a microphone because we're recording this forum as well. So, would somebody like to start with a question? Or any of the panellists or all of the panellists? Here we go.
Thea was talking about post-program regular professional support and mental health support. I just wondered if you distinguish them differently. Is post-program professional support also mental health support, or who are these professionals that are supporting post-program and not mental health professionals?
The men spoke about the people who were supporting them, who were professionals, as being social workers, psychologists and psychiatrists. And that's who I'm talking about when I'm talking about professional post-program support. Some of them also saw professionals for specific mental health problems, but I've separated the 2, although you could argue that I shouldn't. The men's mental health problems were not in the main what I'd call a diagnosed psychiatric illness, but they were more anxiety, distress, depression, which I know can be regarded as a psychiatric illness. And the issue about where their mental health fitted in the whole scheme of things was that the programs did not affect the men's mental health. Their men's mental health did not improve as a result of going to the program. They might have reduced their violent behaviour, but they didn't change their mental health profile. However, their alcoholism and their other substance abuse did reduce a great deal by virtue of going to the problem. So I see that there are mental health problems there for these men that need to be tackled.
Thanks, Thea. Whilst someone's taking a microphone to the next question, Thea, I think you said your report's not finished, so it's not yet published, therefore not yet available.
Unfortunately, it's in my briefcase over there in its first draft with still quite a lot of rewriting to do on it. And not all the findings are in it yet, but I'm pretty much committed to getting it finished in the next 2 months. She hopes.
And where will it be made available?
It's going to go on to the website of Violence Free Families. It's going to be put into a hard copy and it'll be distributed once we get to the printing. We haven't thought further about what we're going to do with it.
Okay, so I think the Pathways Network project officers, we need to monitor and get out to our members when Thea's research can be made available. Elena, I see you've got a hard copy of something.
I was just noticing that the awesome colour scheme was featured in Thea's hair as well. I was going, wow, synergies.
That's called branding.
I really support your report.
Elena, when can you have your report?
Our report, we've run out of hard copies, so it's available on the CIJ's website. So literally just Google Centre for Innovative Justice and it'll take you to a report and you can just download a PDF.
Okay, and Rodney, is there something you would like the members that have attended here today to review as part of their ongoing learning?
Well, certainly our website ntb.org.au has a subsection on it called resources, which has got a lot of different resources and different articles there. For example, there's a Towards Safe Families New South Wales practice guide for doing this work, which can give an insight around what men's behaviour change program workers are like.
We have an article on there about 10 challenges and opportunities for men's behaviour change programs in the future. We have a resource that we did for the WA child protection system about perpetrator accountability in that system and other child-centred resources. So, yeah.
Okay, yes. Well, broadening the message, so we've all got plenty of reading to do and more to follow. And I think a microphone went... Thank you.
My question's for Rodney. Could you give some advice for people assisting perpetrators or people who use family violence in speaking to these men in a way that's not colluding with their violence, but speaking in a way that they will still engage with these violence?
That's obviously a huge question, which is more for a training workshop. And it's great that intention's there. I think zero collusion is almost impossible because particularly when you don't know the men very, very, very well, you won't understand all of the different strands of their violence supporting narratives that they have. But to just give an example, a man as part of a story might talk about his partner wasting money. She just goes out and she wastes money all the time. She buys this stuff which our family doesn't need, and double standards there. He's probably spending a lot of money on alcohol, but whatever. And how do we then respond to something like that when going through the back of our mind is, well, okay, I don't want to challenge him on everything that he said there, and it may not be my role to challenge him on everything he said there as well too, because I've got a specific, legal or family law context here. I want the engagement to improve with him. I want to treat him as a human being, but I don't want to collude with that story that he's obviously building up about his partner being useless with money, because that's obviously part of his violence supporting narrative to use economic abuse and to control the family's finances. Now, this may not be right for your context because it might be going a bit too much into intervention with him, but I might say something back like, it sounds as though that money worries are quite big for you and the family. John, when those money worries are really strong for you, what might happen? Or when those money worries, when you're really worried about money, what might others see you doing? Now, that's a deliberate question that's trying to open up a space to him to see the difference between an emotion and a behaviour. So I'm deliberately not saying that when your missus create all his worry stress for you by going off and spending, I'm thinking, how can I reframe that so he's hearing that I'm hearing what he's saying, but not ascribing it as her fault, talking about the money worries or, when you experience or feel some stress about money. And then the deliberate question is around starting to see there's a difference between the issue and his behaviour, that he's got a choice there, he's got a response. When the stress about money is really there strongly for you, John, what might others see you doing? Or what might be some things that you do when you're really stressed about money? So the question is structured in a way to sow that seed that he's got choices about his behaviour, irrespective of how stressed or angry or anxious or frustrated he might feel. That's just a little example. But I think more comprehensively, when you've got parameters in your work, which I know some of you will have more to a lesser extent, depending upon which part of the family law system you're under, what sort of legal privileges and legal confidentialities that you have. We do offer training, short trainings or longer trainings, to assist practitioners when they've got those constraints. How can they still, for example, pursue their legal mandate with a client, and speaking in legal terms, work in their client's best interest, but at the same time where there's an awareness of risk and where they can open up some space to sow a few seeds for the men to start to be a little bit reflective about their behaviour. We often have to tailor that training because for each different system there's different things that we need to be careful about here. Because we can easily say, go off and do this, and that contravenes the parameters you have. So we're very open to run training and to be able to support you on that.
If I could just add to that actually, the training that Rodney's talking about has been delivered to Victoria Legal Aid duty lawyers in terms of working with respondents to intervention orders. And it's an important way of challenging or addressing that idea that, oh, well, I'm a lawyer, my job is just to deny and minimise. My job is to get him off. My job is to make sure the order isn't imposed or the conditions are as minimal as possible and encroach as little as possible on his life. But if you think about, if you turn the tables a bit and say, well, as a lawyer, a duty lawyer's or any lawyer's job is also a duty to the court and to make sure that your client doesn't get into more trouble. So there is an opportunity even for people who are specifically representing a respondent to an order and therefore supposedly trying to help him to use that opportunity to just send the message that the behaviour is not okay. And what's interesting is that where NTV has delivered that training to Victoria Legal Aid duty lawyers, findings about breaches from respondents who've been through the duty lawyer service are really significantly different to those in other jurisdictions where duty lawyers haven't received that training. So I think that was something that we highlighted in our report, which really struck me.
Thank you, Elena. Just while the microphone's coming up here, that might be something, therefore, that maybe Pathways could, on behalf of any interested members, maybe we could negotiate some training using the services that Rodney's talking about. Does that sound like something that might be of interest? Could I just have a quick show of hands, please?
I think that'd be a great idea.
Okay, thank you, project officers. Make the appropriate notes. And now there's a question here. Thank you.
Thea, as well as doing family law, I do quite a lot of criminal law, so that means I sit in magistrates' courts for hours. And I hear magistrates day in, day out saying to people, it'd be really good if you did a behavioural change course, but I'm not going to order it, you do it for yourself. And that, like I heard it yesterday, I sat in Frank's magistrates' court for hours yesterday waiting to get on, and I heard that said. Very experienced magistrates taking the attitude that it's better that people choose to do those courses rather than order to do them. As your research going to be just pushed into the magistrates' courts, because that's where it needs to be, magistrates, because they don't think it's a good idea to order people to do these courses.
Thank you for those comments, because I didn't appreciate that would be their attitude, and we certainly will eventually start trying to move what we've found into areas of practice. And I think one of the strong messages I was trying to give today was that recommending is very nice, but it is more effective to order, although I have to concede I don't really know why.
Surely it's because most of them know they're going to jail if they don't. Because most of the orders, I would say, would be as a result of breach of intervention orders.
I think that the legal penalties are not just jail. For some people, they avoid a conviction if they do the program. And I think particularly that there's a group of men who will really go a long way to avoid a conviction because it's going to devastate their work situation. But I also think that somehow tight monitoring, which has been referred to, is very, very important. And it is true that there are long waiting lists for men's behaviour change programs, and to make men wait for them reduces their motivation, reduces the effectiveness of them. So it's not just the program that has to be done in the best possible way. It is the surrounds of the program, the context. And until you've got a tight surround, you're not getting your maximum. I didn't speak about everything I would like to say about our use of the programs. There is more that I would like to say, but I think what you are telling me is that we really have to approach the magistrates.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we will.
Again, I'd like to actually add to that, because the realities of the current situation is that actually there's only 2 divisions of the court that can mandate respondents to behaviour change programs, and even then they can only actually mandate them to an intake assessment. You can't mandate somebody to participate.
That is true. That's all you can do.
So under legislative mandate, we're actually very limited. But we also face the challenge that many magistrates feel and just judicial officers generally, or anyone in the legal system, feels differently about, or feels that imposing participation in a program as a condition of an order is different from imposing a condition that you don't do this and you don't do that, and therefore feel reluctant to bring breach of that condition into the realm of criminal sanction. Now, the irony, of course, is that the stats tell us is that very rarely does anybody who's just breached, well, I mean, we don't have enough information about it, but just breached for not attending your program is going to get a custodial sentence. It just doesn't happen. It happens, custodial sentences happen in the context of further we know how hard it is for somebody to actually get sent to jail for this stuff. But in the US, similarly, where it is mandated, similarly, that just people don't get sentences for just that breach. So it's balancing that. That said, a lot of that's going to change with the Royal Commission rollout of the Royal Commission recommendations, because there's going to be so many more specialist divisions. So that has to be. Then, of course, that has huge implications for the sector in terms of being able to deliver the programs. So some magistrates, and I have no idea whether this would have been the case, are renowned for their particular courtcraft in successfully, despite the fact that they don't have the provision to mandate, successfully engaging a bloke in the idea that it's in his interest to do a program. And some are renowned of being very good at that, and some potentially not, and some might, I'm guessing in that situation, they might even look like they're doing him a favour. I'm not going to order you. I won't draw your attention to the fact that I can't actually order you. I'm going to let you, I'm going to make you realise that it's in your interest. So, but there's no consistent practice. And that's one of the things that the courts are going to have to try and work on, because it varies wildly.
Can I ask what the ability of, in the family law system, for any ordering of such programs? I mean, I know that clients can be directed to attend parenting orders programs or mediation or counselling. Are there experiences of orders for men's behaviour change programs?
Yeah, same thing.
Okay, and what does the court want to know about attendance?
That they've enrolled, generally. There's normally an order that they forthwith enrol and attend and provide a certificate of completion.
Thank you.
Which I think is not enough. I think that the court should require a much better report than that they did it and that they finished it. I think they really need to know the agency's view about how well they progressed during that program. And I think it's just part of the general tightening up of the service system. And I think that our study will show that the pathways between all these services are not working particularly well and have not always been created either. So it's very hard to make a pathway that hasn't been designed yet work.
Looks like family law pathways networks are in for a longer
Well, yes.
There's a question over here. And while we're waiting, there's one coming here too.
Can I just ask, the assessment report, is that something agencies will currently provide if requested?
Well, I think this is an interesting question. Some agencies will and some don't see it as their responsibility. And I'm not just talking to the courts. I would really like the message to go to agencies that they should be tightening their procedures. So when a man finishes, they should be doing an exit interview and they should be providing a report for any relevant agency that needs one. And also tacked onto that, I think, is a really major issue of further subsequent referral, because I think that the program needs to often be buttressed by other programs as well, and the men need a lot of follow-up.
All right, I think we're coming to the end of our event, and if there is one final question, that will be fine. Oh yes, there is one. Well done, sir.
Thank you very much. How can we increase the number of the men behavioral change programs? Because they are right now very limited. The demand is really high. And I've been seeing magistrates are really struggling with the perpetrators where to refer them. So how can we increase the number of them?
Can I do that?
Yes, I think you'd be the right person.
No problems. This is obviously a huge issue. There's money in the Victorian state budget. The government has recognised that there needs to be a growth and expansion program for there to be more men's behaviour change program providers and more spaces. But in addition to that, for there to be enhanced ways of working as well too. I think many program providers may not do, for example, what you were talking about, Thea, in reporting back sufficiently for a range of reasons. Part of that is the low resources. Part of that is many of the programs are too short. Part of that is that many of the programs don't have a strong enough focus on addressing the man as a father and what that means for his children. Part of it is because many of the program providers, although they're willing to and would like to, don't have the capacity to do some complementary one-to-one work with the men as well as the group, or to look at other sort of case management needs at the same time. Programs would love to devote more resources to partner support work than what they do. So I think there's both money in the budget to expand the number of programs over time, but also for programs to work more smarter in some ways, to provide more tailored interventions. That's going to take years. It's going to take a professional workforce development strategy because the workforce is reasonably small, and it's going to take more collaboration with our colleagues in AOD, mental health, forensic sectors, etc., so that we can provide more of a tailored response. So the will is there. The money is kind of coming, at least it is for now. The next 2 or 3 years are going to be very, very big in how we use that money to be creative. And just a quick example of that, there's no reason why we can't look at more men's behaviour change programs that's situated much more closely within family services or child protection contexts. There are a few of those programs in the UK where they're run specifically within those contexts. There might be interventions such as the Caring Dads program coming out of Canada, where men who can't yet be mandated to go to a men's behaviour change program, but they're willing to work on their parenting, but through a domestic violence informed intervention that's linked in with mother contact. So I think we're going to find quite a creative time over the next 2 or 3 years. Some resources are there, so we might find some of that demand pressure starting to ease, but programs also, we need to raise the bar on what we're doing. We need to work better, and we want to, we just haven't had the resources for that.
Thanks, Rodney. That's a great note to finish on, and as part of the Pathways Network, I'll commit to you that we'll look to see if we can start the education ball rolling and start lifting the bar for all of us, and whether we work, no matter which section of the family law sector that we're working in. So I'd like to thank Rodney and Elena and Thea, and we have a small gift.
Not that small.
No, it's okay.
I've already got
And I will remind you 2 things. Please, if you have a pocket, slip in something to eat and something to drink, don't leave it at home, and go quietly as you leave the premises. And in concluding, can I thank the Federal Circuit Court of Australia and the Family Court of Australia for once again providing us with such support, and it makes it a really exciting experience to come here and a privilege to have such great speakers. So thanks everyone.